customers need de-risked LNG. They want LNG that's backed by government support. They want shorter and uncongested transit routes. And so we've been able to really tick those three key boxes for our customers for supply into the Asia Pacific market, which has in turn led to where we're at today commercially.
Frontiers and Pioneers, in association with Sempra Infrastructure.
Hello and welcome to LNG TV. I'm Will Dawson, and on the show today, I'm joined by the Chief Commercial Officer of Mexico Pacific Limited. My guest was previously Head of Commercial LNG Marketing for the $18.5 billion Gladstone LNG project, and is now developing a world-scale Greenfield LNG project on the west coast of Mexico with MPL. Welcome, Sarah Bairstow. What an exciting time for MPL. For those less familiar, could you share a little bit more about the project?
Yeah, sure. We are going about development here a little differently than most other projects. So not everybody knows a lot about us. We're okay with that, but sometimes it is hard when you're working on such an exciting project. For those that aren't familiar, we're developing a 14.1 million tonne anchor LNG project at Puerto Libertad, which is just south of the US border on the west coast of Mexico. And we have a brilliant site and location. The site itself has plenty of room, there's no dredging, it's a deep water port, great shipping channels, but most importantly, and the thing that makes our project really unique, is that it's located with one of the world's cheapest gas basins, the Permian Basin, in our backyard, and the engine room of LNG demand, really Asia, in our front yard. So most people don't realise we're a similar proximity to Waha as in the Permian Basin as those projects in Brownsville, for example, and obviously much shorter shipping distance into Asia. But our site really, the fundamentals are connecting that US gas basin with the Asian LNG market to deliver the lowest landed price of LNG, really free of Panama Canal risk. Which is great. So great project, and certainly an equally large component of that is the LNG and the executive team that we have here at MPL. So we have delivered over a third of the LNG facilities operating around the world today. So it's really a great combination of those project fundamentals backed by our experienced executive team.
Your CEO, Doug Shander, speaking of your executive team, described West Coast Mexican LNG as the Black Pearl of North American LNG. What do you think he meant by that?
Yeah, look, I've heard us called a few things: the Black Pearl of North American LNG, the Dark Horse. It seems there's a few little sayings around our project. I mean, the Black Pearl, I expect that's probably a reference to this being, the ultimate or optimal goal in terms of an LNG project in North America. We're really taking, that wonderful US Gulf Coast model, Cheniere was such a great success in bringing that into market, essentially, taking liquid gas basins, flexible contracting terms associated with all of that, and low-priced US indexed gas, but really taking that wonderful model and doing it on the West Coast to allow customers to really optimize the pricing. You can do it for a cheaper price, given we're a shorter shipping distance into Asia, and really de-risking it by taking out that Panama Canal risk that the US Gulf Coast obviously deal with in getting their volumes into Asia.
It sounds incredibly exciting, and you're well positioned, but where are you at currently? And what are the kind of remaining steps that you need to take as a company in a project to get to an FID?
Yeah, I mean, look, none of this happens overnight. We've been incredibly busy the last few years, but we've rounded the corner now in that final approach to FID, which is really exciting. If you think about sort of the key pillars of any LNG project, on the engineering and construction side, we're partnered with Bechtel and ConocoPhillips. We've delivered 15 trains with both Bechtel and Conoco over the last 7 years. So we know them well, couldn't ask for better partners. They're doing a really great job in that space. Permitting, we're continuing to receive really strong support from local, state and federal levels of the Mexican government, which has really been evidenced by the advanced stage of permitting that we're in now, We only need one final permit now to take FID and expect that to be in hand shortly. Commercially, we've got the transportation in hand in terms of piping the gas to the facility, and we've started signing SPAs, which is really exciting. We are very much oversubscribed in terms of customer demand, which is fantastic, and really don't have a lot of LNG left to contract for that Train 1, Train 2 initial FID. So we're really now in that final approach where I guess a key component of that is financing. This is a project financed facility, but we're seeing strong appetite in the lender market for an offering like ours, particularly given, I guess, that Black Pearl nature. So we're expecting Train 1, Train 2 FID later this year. I think one of the challenges for us is we're really trying to maintain discipline and focus on those first two trains. For this anchor facility, we then have Train 3, and then with all of the land that we own down in Puerto Libertad, it would be remiss of us to not immediately then turn to growth to capture some of that excess demand. So we're expecting to turn to that later this year. And while we've been able to fly under the radar to date, and as discreet as we may be, I think you'll be hearing a lot more about the project this year.
Well, we look forward to hearing more. So obviously you announced at CERAWeek that you had got sort of signed commitment for, I believe it to be sort of a third of your phase 1 volumes. Specifically, in terms of those conversations with the market, is there one thing, or what are the multiple things that are really giving MPL the edge?
Yeah, look, I think that customers generally do see our project as sort of that enhanced or de-risked version of the Gulf Coast model. Very familiar with that. It's a fantastic model. But we really take that and can make it a cheaper, more flexible LNG offering with greater certainty for those customers, which is pretty amazing and exciting to be a part of. But obviously, that's been a key component in really bringing in that contracting success for us. When we break it down, I think particularly given our project primarily deals with the Asia Pacific market, and it's a huge market, 70% of current LNG demand and over 75% of forecast demand. This market does look at LNG a little differently. I would say there's probably 3 key things they've been seeking out and talking to us about, and they're really price, supply flexibility, and that certainty. On the price front, that's pretty easy for us. As much as I'd like to say it's the team, it's really the asset that allows us to deliver that really low price LNG into Asia for them. On the supply flexibility, the pandemic has really demonstrated to the market more broadly that it's incredibly important to be able to respond in a pretty agile manner to changing market environments, downstream demands, etc. So we offer a lot of flexibility for these customers in that regard. You really can't match that in dedicated E&P type LNG project plays. And then lastly, on certainty, this has always been important, as I mentioned before, for the Asia Pacific market. It's a market that is, for the most part, so heavily reliant on energy imports for national energy security, which has an energy security become the phrase of the day recently. We've seen the whole world reprioritize energy security. It's certainly vital these days. But that energy security really stems from supply certainty, right? So customers need de-risked LNG. They want LNG that's backed by government support. They want shorter and uncongested transit routes, etc. And so we've been able to really tick those 3 key boxes for our customers for supply into the Asia Pacific market, which has in turn led to where we're at today commercially.
Gas is sort of firmly in the headlines in 2022 and for many has been sort of projected into the public consciousness. What is your view on the global gas outlook in kind of both the near and midterm?
Yeah, I mean, what an evolving market. Prior to recent events, we were already seeing heightened pricing and a real lack of volume availability in the short term. Of course, that was coupled with, close to 100 million tons of additional LNG being required by 2030. So it was already a fascinating market in a sense. Natural gas was being embraced by Asia as the true transition bridge to a lower carbon future, with Europe firmly kind of turning away from gas in a sense and focusing more on renewables and technologies. And that's obviously just been turned on its head in recent months. The world and the LNG market certainly has been put under significant strain. We see the short-term market as remaining incredibly uncertain, with Europe as, Europe really steps back into the LNG market with a big and a heavy pull on that LNG demand, and has also rejoined Asia in a sense in that quest for energy security now, given they're looking to move off of Russian supply. But a lot of these recent events have also added strain to the mid and the longer term markets. This is such a heavily integrated and heavily linked market across short, mid, and longer terms. We already had that supply shortage of 100 million tonnes by 2030. But if you look at Europe, they're currently importing around the LNG equivalent of 100 million tonnes of Russian pipeline gas. There's a further 70 million tonnes or so of Russian LNG that's currently operating or under construction for supply into global markets that also now looks uncertain. So while it's easy to look at that short-term space and the impact there, on the long term, we're seeing a huge step change from a 100 million tonne shortage by 2030 to potentially somewhere around the 270 million tonne shortage level, which is obviously unprecedented. So it's certainly an ever-changing dynamic. I think we'll start to see a lot more focus move from just immediate short-term solutions and focus into the broader impacts on the mid to long-term space.
Clearly, the need for gas appears evident, but with continued high price surely comes potential risk, either from a delay in the move to gas or even the move away from gas. Would you agree with that sentiment?
Yeah, look, I think that it certainly does create short-term stress. This level of high pricing isn't good for anyone. You can look at it on a shorter-term basis as it becomes less affordable for countries that are really needing, in particular, to transition away from higher carbon emitting fossil fuels over to gas. And obviously, if it destroys any of those demand centres, even temporarily, that has flow-on longer-term effects. We see that with some of the disruption in the way that Europe is looking at energy security and certainly pipeline gas from Russia, that it will balance out. We're expecting that customers more broadly and across the world will actually look to contract more and contract in an accelerated fashion to ensure that they can mitigate any of those gaps over that mid to long-term basis. So I'd certainly agree that it's got a lot of disruption. It's not sustainable. It's not healthy over the longer term, but I think it will settle out.
Picking up on two things that we've kind of touched upon in the conversation so far, both the idea of heightened awareness or need for energy security and indeed kind of the improved outlook for energy supply or natural gas demand globally. I guess the question I have for you, specifically when you talking about buyers' wants, is it still a buyer's market, or is there been a shift?
Yeah, if you look at current pricing, the availability of LNG and the strain on the market, I think most people would say it's turned to a seller's market. But given the geopolitical events that are driving that pricing, it doesn't feel right really to describe it that way. And it's a relationship-driven industry, and I think there's certainly empathy around what the current underlying drivers really are at the moment. But I think the short-term market is a really unique pocket at this point in time. As we said, high prices aren't really good for anyone on a sustainable basis. But I find it most interesting in terms of the shift in terms of the longer-term space. The short-term market, I think it's a very collaborative market at this point in time. We'll see greater global collaboration and assistance to ensure key markets receive the gas that they need to maintain shorter-term energy security. But in the longer term, I think we're going to see Europe really return to a mindset of their own energy security and diversification. And those decisions need to be taken now. I mean, if we go back to the forecast in terms of the LNG supply shortage, if we're thinking that it's going to go from what we thought was 100 million tonnes supply gap to 2030 last year to now close to a 270 million tonne supply shortage, the challenge that the market has the contracting window for when that LNG is really needed passed. If it has, then customers are going to be left with a greater and a longer exposure to higher pricing. Keeping in mind these LNG projects, the LNG supply, it's not infinite from existing projects. New projects need to be developed. And for the most part, they take close to 10 years from initial concept and development through to steady state operations. There are long lead permits, engineering, everything you need to do prior to FID, and then another 4 to 5 years to really build it. And, while there are currently plenty of proposed LNG projects, not all of them will be sanctioned. Not all of them are ticking those key boxes we talked about earlier for customers. And so we really only see a handful of FIDs happening in 2022 and 2023, either, due to some of those projects being in advanced stages and able to take FID, or perhaps as a result of others not being able to meet buyer requirements. But this is going to really add further stress to that long-term environment if you think about the level of LNG that's capable of being executed and capable of being delivered, in the last 5 years of this decade to really try to settle out the market and some of the customer requirements from an energy security perspective.
Proponents of LNG will quickly point to the emission reduction benefits in a switch, say, from coal to natural gas. But is this going to be enough as we progress with the energy transition? Or, is there more that needs to be done?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think it's important that we don't lose line of sight to the energy transition as the market currently comes to grips with changes around Europe. But, we deal with LNG customers every day, and consistently, particularly those in Asia, are telling us that price competitiveness really remains paramount. We've got to remember that LNG imports are critical to ensure national energy security for these countries. And so when we look at Asia in particular, that has such a large portion of current and future LNG demand, this is also a region that does remain heavily reliant on coal, one of the greatest contributors to global carbon emissions. And they're telling us today that they aren't currently focused on large-scale or long-term LNG offsets or carbon-neutral LNG, let alone products they need to pay a premium for. And that's not because they don't believe in and are looking to back the energy transition. It's more that for them, they can achieve far more economic and far greater emission reductions by focusing on the use of natural gas to displace coal, really. I mean, it becomes a capital allocation question. Do you pay more for carbon offsets in power generation today, or less for market-based natural gas, sort of coal to gas switching outcomes that result in much higher impact? So, while customers are telling us they don't need, and they certainly don't want to pay for that low carbon LNG today, we nevertheless are focusing on doing our part and trying to facilitate lower carbon LNG solutions in the future. We're really excited. You may have heard about our low carbon LNG collaboration with our partners ConocoPhillips and Bechtel. We were selected for this collaboration, basically based on the merits of the project. And through this collaboration, rather than focusing on, the more traditional approach, I would say these days, of producing and then storing carbon, or for some projects, just tracking the emissions, we have a phenomenal pool of talent instead focused on the next stage of LNG design, which is avoiding the production of emissions in the first place. So we kind of see this as a next generation of lower carbon LNG, and we think it's the responsible approach. And to be honest, we think it's the right thing to do. And for our project, given we've got multiple trains coming after each other, there's naturally economies of scale that come with that. And we've chosen to capture some of that economy of scale to really afford this low carbon LNG solution for our customers and ultimately the markets that really need it.
And finally, Sarah, we like to ask everyone who comes on LNG TV about impact. When hopefully a long time from now, you get the opportunity to retire to the east coast of Australia, what would be the impact you would like to have on the organisations you work with and indeed the industry?
Well, I'm a very small part of a very big industry, but if I think about positive impact, the impact our industry can have on lives around the world is truly amazing when you really think about it. I feel incredibly privileged to be part of an industry that's not only right now unifying and ensuring energy security around the world. That's so critical, but also giving opportunity to so many that haven't had, the chance to have a country that's industrialized in the way that much of the Western world already has. And natural gas is really the only path out of energy poverty for so many countries around the world, and by virtue, so many people around the world. And these are real people who even today don't have access to power, which of course has a profound impact, I suppose, on their standard of living. So to think about being a part of an industry that has the capability to make those sorts of impacts on the lives of people around the world makes me really proud. So even if it's only a very small part of that, hopefully I've played a part.
No doubt you will, Sarah. Thank you so very much for joining us today. I wish you, the team and everyone at MPL every success and look forward to hearing about a positive FID later on this year.
Thanks, Will. Appreciate the time.
Thank you for watching this episode of Frontiers and Pioneers on LNG TV. We look forward to seeing you next time.
Frontiers and Pioneers in association with Sempra Infrastructure.